If there was a competition for the most grotesque self-modification, Karl Ruprecht Kroenen would become the global champion. No doubts about that. He's like the love child of decaying flesh and mechanical contrivance in both Mike Mignola's Hellboy comics and Guillermo del Toro's 2004 Hellboy movie, albeit with a few differences. This masked man with a super prolonged life used to be a disfigured Nazi scientist in the Hellboy comics, but he used a protective suit to carry on in life and do the most Nazi thing you could imagine. In the Oscar-winning director's film, however, he was an undead clockwork assassin who was kept quote-unquote alive by some very ingenious mechanical implants, but not without a slight touch of black magic. So in this video, we're going to explore everything there is to explore about the anatomy, physiology, and body modification of the notorious Karl Ruprecht Kroenen, be it his surgically mutated face or his artificial heart pumping God knows what in his chest. But before I begin, please consider hitting the like and subscribe buttons. These 2 small clicks from you will help us tremendously in bringing you more of these marvelous videos. And now, let's begin. Kroenens Mask that gives him air from hell and his suit. The first thing you notice while looking at him is that strange and low-key intimidating mask of his. In both versions, he hides his face behind a respirator-like gas mask, which gives him an outlook that's equal parts disturbing and expressionless. In the comics, this mask, along with a full protective bodysuit, is explained as a necessity. You see, after sustaining self-performed surgeries in an accident that disfigured him, the mask and the suit helped in keeping him sterile and protecting his body. It's also necessary to him because he has a pathological fear of bacteria. Mignola never elaborated much on the mask's specific design, but it seems that it's pretty much a permanent fixture for Kroenen. Furthermore, it presumably helps in purifying the air to serve his germophobia, in addition to assisting his weakened body. Needless to say, the film took the mask from the comics but made it way more functional and evil. The cinematic mask is made of a rigid black resin with an integrated metal breathing apparatus around the mouth. Twin fan-like filters are placed where his mouth should be. The chin has a grated vent, and if you look closely, you can see red wires running through it. This quote-unquote industrial gothic device filters air for our nefarious villain, but it serves more purpose than that. In the film's lore, it's called an anti-life mask that pumps the sulfurous air of hell into his decayed lungs. In other words, it's as if the mask is actively supplying him with some noxious cocktail of chemicals from hell, kind of like a supernatural vapor to sustain his rotting body. Does this also mean that Kroenen can't breathe fresh air? By fresh air, I mean air from Earth, because we all know how bad the pollution problem is becoming across the globe. Anyway, I think it makes sense. The sulfurous air is to Kroenen what oxygen is to humans. Without it, he simply couldn't survive. Now let's take a look at what his suit does for him. So, Kroenen's protective suit complements his mask in every possible way. In the comics, it's a simple but tightly sealed uniform. It's also sterilized so that his fragile body is protected at all times. Del Toro's film preserves this look with a sleek black leather trench coat, gloves, and SS uniform accoutrements. But once again, these have a practical purpose for his condition. The suit likely serves as containment, keeping him in and unwanted organisms out. By the film's timeline of the late 20th century, and then 2004, Kroenen's blood has long dried into dust inside his veins, meaning any puncture in his body, be it from a gunshot or a stab, would yield no blood, and only a puff of powder would come out. The suit and gloves would help keep that desiccated body intact and prevent contamination or further decay. If you think about it, the overall external appearance in the comic as well as the movie is that of a mummified soldier. Someone who's entirely covered from head to toe, and the only things that are visible are his glass eye lenses. In the film, the lenses are dark acrylic in nature, and are built into the mask so that Kroenen can see out, even if no one can see in. What are the self-inflicted mutilations Kroenen got himself pre-mechanization? Kroenen's path to becoming a monster began with self-inflicted injuries long before any clockwork was involved. The one thing that both the comic and film versions agree on is that Kroenen was a masochist with a surgical addiction who practiced on his own body. As a young man, he began his quest for physical perfection, which was obviously a severely warped ideal to begin with, and in this quest he performed some extremely brutal, painful, and permanent modifications on himself. He surgically removed his own eyelids and lips, which left his eyes permanently open and his mouth lipless. Additionally, he also removed all of his fingernails and toenails to presumably eliminate what he saw as imperfections. It goes without saying that the results of these procedures were ghastly. You see, the stupid evil fellow didn't realize that without eyelids, his eyes would run the constant risk of drying out or infection, and that's why he had to get those goggles to serve as masks for his eyes. The missing lips meant his teeth and gums were exposed in a death head's grin beneath the respirator. In fact, in the film we get a quick look at his skeletal mouth when the mask is briefly off his head. These mutilations also explain why Kroenen never removes his mask in public. His face is effectively destroyed by his own hand, and he's probably not too proud of how he looks. In the comics, creator Mike Mignola left much of Kroenen's body to the imagination of the readers. We just know he's hideously disfigured and prefers to remain masked. The film drives the point home visually by showing an unmasked Kroenen in shadow, complete with a desiccated noseless face, with sunken eyes, and taut skin pulled back from the teeth. One can deduce that under the mask, his skin is pale and lifeless, likely scarred from surgeries and further degraded by all those decades without normal blood flow. It's said that neither death nor flesh can contain his evil. His body rots, but Kroenen cannot be stopped. That's from the description of Kroenen's powers as mentioned on the Hellboy promotional website. It's a poetic way to describe how ruined his flesh is, yet animated by unnatural means. It's worth noting that Kroenen's obsession with surgery can actually be linked to his obsessive-compulsive desire for control and cleanliness. As I mentioned, he had severe OCD and germophobia. This is why he designed a tight-fitting mask to filter out germs, which he wore almost permanently even before his body became fully mechanical. Now, you see the irony here, don't you? I mean, the very measures he took to perfect and preserve his body led to him becoming the poster boy of all things monstrous. Mechanical augmentations, aka his clockwork body. I've already explained the key difference between the film Kroenen and the comic Kroenen is the extensive mechanical augmentation of his body. Del Toro transformed Kroenen into what could be described as a steampunk cyborg. It was an ingenious creative decision because Del Toro basically used the character's engineering genius as a plot device, and Kroenen literally rebuilt himself after near-death injuries, because he's that great of an engineer. It almost reminds me of that scene from Friends where Joey's character, Drake Ramore, is killed, and the only person who could have saved him was himself. Anyway, coming back to Kroenen, these upgrades are a mix of prosthetics and life support machinery, which give him a clockwork body that basically cheats death. So let's take a look at all the major artificial components integrated into Kroenen's anatomy in the film. Clockwork heart and wind-up mechanism. The centerpiece of Kroenen's augmented body is his mechanical heart, which is a gear-driven contraption implanted in his chest. After his organic heart was damaged due to impalement during Project Ragnarok in the film's backstory, Kroenen replaced it with this clockwork device. It's operated by a wind-up key protruding from his chest, which he must crank to keep himself going, and that pretty much means that Kroenen's life depends on a wind-up toy, which in this case is a tech-heavy wind-up toy coated with supernatural elements. So, by turning the key, he can recharge or stimulate his body. Cranking the key revs up his cardiovascular function and nervous system, which boosts his speed and reflexes for a short time. This explains the almost superhuman agility he has. For example, he deflects bullets with his blades, as seen in the film. Conversely, he can also unwind or still the key to switch off his body to put himself into a death-like dormant state. Medical tests would show no pulse when he does this, because in a literal sense, he has stopped his heart, which is one of the tricks he uses to play dead and infiltrate enemy facilities. The heart mechanism itself is described in expanded lore as being partly mystical. Some sources suggest it might be mentally linked to him, so he can control his heartbeat at will. If I have to be a bit speculative and scientific, I believe the clockwork heart functions as a powerful pump or oscillator. With Kroenen's blood dried into dust, the so-called heart likely doesn't circulate blood like a normal heart, but instead might circulate air or hydraulic fluid, or simply generate kinetic energy to move his limbs. It serves as a combination pacemaker and motor, and keeps a minimal degree of metabolic activity in his organs, and actuates his movements via pneumatic pressure, or maybe it simply tugs on muscle groups, albeit mechanically. In the film, we indeed see Kroenen periodically winding himself up before combat, which only goes on to further prove the fact that he needs to refuel his mechanical heart's energy to maintain peak performance. Prosthetic hand. Left hand. Kroenen's left hand is an artificial prosthetic and serves as the real hand he lost. Interestingly, even Hellboy lost a hand, his right hand, which was axed by his father only to be replaced with the right hand of doom. Kroenen's case was different. In the 2004 film's opening battle, a grenade blast blew off his left hand, and his prosthetic hand is as much an engineering marvel as his heart. Made of metal and possibly high-grade polymers, the left hand attaches at his wrist, and as far as dexterity is concerned, it's as good as any human hand, only more powerful. The mechanical nature likely gives him a stronger grip, or perhaps even adjustable strength, since he doesn't feel pain or strain. It also houses one of his primary weapons, a slender stiletto blade that can pop out from the wrist or sleeve. This effectively turns his forearm into a weapon good for stabbing his foes. Now what really amazes me is how efficiently he uses swords and daggers while fighting. We as humans are able to use our hands so efficiently because they're connected through a nervous system to the brain. So does that mean that Kroenen's prosthetic hand is also connected to whatever is left of his mind through some sort of system? perhaps via implanted electrodes or even mystical linkage similar to his heart. I mean, those metal fingers don't seem to tremble or not follow his commands. In fact, they're so precise that he could perform surgery on himself. Whatever it is, I respect Del Toro because his storytelling underscores a man's lack of humanity by making machine parts do human things. Spinal reinforcement. Another augmentation is the steel rod implanted in Kroenen's spine. The same explosion that injured his heart also shattered part of his spine. To repair this, Kroenen installed a flexible steel spine segment to bridge the damaged vertebrae. Essentially, his backbone is partially replaced by metal. This would serve two purposes. First, structurally, it supports his body and allows him to stand, twist, and fight without paralysis. And the second one is neurological. I mean, it perhaps protects or even replaces the damaged spinal cord section. In a realistic sense, a metal rod in place of bone could anchor his posture and absorb shocks, which might explain why he can survive heavy impacts. Hellboy ultimately had to impale and crush Kroenen to stop him, since mere punches or falls weren't doing the job, as his reinforced skeleton was constantly withstanding those blows. There's also a probability that the rod could be somewhat articulated, and perhaps it acts like a flexible spring to keep him limber despite the injury. The film doesn't explicitly speak about the spine implant on screen, but it's mentioned in supplementary material that his spine was repaired with steel. In the comics continuity, nothing like this is mentioned. Kroenen never became that injured or that modified in print. So this spine augmentation is another film-specific enhancement. Mechanical lungs. In addition to the big three, that is his heart, the hand, and the spine, Kroenen's body likely contains a host of minor implants. I'm being slightly speculative here, I agree. His lungs are decayed, and that's for sure, but they still breathe in that sulfurous air from hell, which in turn means that they're pretty much functional, so they might have some mechanism to help inflate them since his breathing is aided by the mask apparatus. We also know that his mask pumps air, the hellish air, into his lungs, which could mean that he might not even breathe normally on his own. Does he have sand from the Nile for blood? Now, we've spoken a lot about the blood, which is turned to dust. Some have described the film Kroenen as having sand from the Nile in his veins, which is probably just a poetic way to say his veins carry dust instead of blood. If taken literally, perhaps he at one point transfused himself with some preservative sand that actually came from the banks of the Nile. Or simply as his blood desiccated, the residue is like fine sand. His entire circulatory system could be largely vestigial now, meaning he's functionally surviving on anaerobic respiration, which is basically a type of cellular respiration that occurs in the absence of oxygen, allowing cells to generate energy even when oxygen is not available. We do have real-life organisms, such as the yeast cells or the lactic acid bacteria, that produce energy without the use of oxygen. Other implants and modifications. We might speculate that to compensate for the lost body parts, Kroenen could have small pumps or gear-driven valves inserted in major muscle groups to keep them oxygenated or filled with energy to function, or maybe they're made to work simply through magic. He might also have reinforced joints, possibly gear hinges in knees or elbows, since his movements can be unnaturally fluid yet strong. One scene shows him scuttling along a wall like a spider, so it's safe to say that his range of motion exceeds normal human joints. I'm sure there are many other mechanical augmentations that Kroenen has done to himself, and that makes sense because it's entirely in character that Kroenen wouldn't stop at a clockwork heart and mechanical hand and spine. He would iterate his own form with whatever prosthetics he deemed necessary. Undead biological physiology and function. Despite all the metal and gadgetry, Kroenen is still part biological, and those biological parts are in an undead state. His physiology is best described as defunct, for lack of a better word. He's lost the ability to feel pain entirely, owing partly to nerve damage from surgeries and partly to whatever occult reanimation keeps him going. Bullets don't do crap for him. In fact, gunshots do minimal damage because there's no bleeding and seemingly no vital organs left to shock. However, this doesn't mean he's indestructible. It only means that his body doesn't react to injury in a normal human way. He doesn't succumb to infection, which he must be happy about, given his fear of germs. But then again, what germ would want to live on undead tissue? Also, he doesn't require food, water, or as I mentioned earlier, even oxygen in any conventional sense. We've seen how Kroenen can lie dormant for decades and then reawaken without ill effect, which means that his metabolism has effectively shut down and been replaced with something else. Something much more advanced or primal, depending on how you look at the guy. The film intends to say that Rasputin's occult influence might have a hand in Kroenen's longevity. Oh yeah, he was Rasputin's foremost disciple. So phrases like, thanks to the inexplicable powers of science and black magic, Kroenen repaired himself, are used to explain his return in 2004. This means that while Kroenen's engineering skills did most of the physical rebuilding, some supernatural force keeps the otherwise dead flesh active, From a fictional science point of view, I think that the clockwork heart, apart from being a pump, is also a supernatural arcane device, perhaps something that generates an electromagnetic field or mystical energy that prevents his remaining tissues from decaying further. The Dark Horse Hellboy website even goes on to say that the heart supports the rest of his organs, preventing them from losing effectiveness, and he even keeps his skin in good condition, which grants him a semblance of an active individual who does not rot. In fact, he almost looks like he's a young man, but in the movie we don't really see a youthful Kroenen. But it's true that he's unnaturally preserved given he's over 100 years old. He moves with the energy of a much younger man, meaning his muscles haven't stiffened the way a normal body would. Possibly the absence of lactic acid buildup and fatigue toxins means he never gets tired or cramped. Essentially, he has near limitless stamina. Comic Kroenen versus film Kroenen. It's clear that Guillermo del Toro's film dramatically amplifies Kroenen's anatomy compared to the comics. In the comics, Kroenen is essentially human, albeit a very frail and scarred human. He ages normally, being put in suspended animation via cryogenics at one point to survive until the modern era, and ultimately can be killed by conventional means. In fact, he dies definitively in a later comic arc. Physically, he's described as a meek, ordinary scientist in a mask, not exceptionally strong or fast on his own. In the film, Kroenen is a force to be reckoned with. He's an undead assassin with superhuman agility and durability. His body doesn't age or degrade in the normal way, and he's effectively immortal unless destroyed. But doing that is no easy task. The film's Kroenen is often referred to as Hitler's top assassin rather than just a scientist. Both versions wear a gas mask, but the reasons differ. Comic Kroenens Mask is used to hide disfigurement and protect him from germs. Therefore, it's a practical medical device given his delicate condition. In the film, Kroenens Mask serves as a life support function, pumps specialized air, and hides a far more horrific face. You know, the missing eyelids and lips and all that. The film explicitly shows that Kroenen voluntarily carved up his face, but that's only been alluded to in the comics. Additionally, the design of the mask in the film is more elaborate, with mechanical filters and ornate details, compared to the simpler comic mask. In conclusion, the sum of these augmentations is that Kroenen's body is no longer wholly organic, and that's why he's often called semi-mechanical. And indeed, one could argue he's more mechanism than man at this point. Unlike a traditional cyborg, though, Kroenen's tech is antiquated by modern standards. He has these whirring gears, springs, and handmade apparati, which is exceedingly reminiscent of a World War II era genius or maybe even Victorian steampunk. That's all for this one, folks. See you in the next one. And if you want us to explore something or someone else, be it from the Hellboy saga or anything else, you know where to put that request. If you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.